You are listening to the US of NA by Nation Beer, a series of stories about the people and places from every corner of the country who are helping fuel the NA beer movement. If you like this episode, please add us to your library in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen. For more great NA stories, including our many beer reviews, visit nationbeer.com. Are you a non-alcoholic beverage brand looking for help with growth? Then go to nation.beer to learn more about our digital marketing services. So thanks for listening today. I'm John Eggleton, your host and chief optimist of Nation Beer. Today is another notebook episode where we spotlight an NA tastemaker to catch up on all things non-alcoholic. Today I'm joined by Chi Jennings. She's a friend of ours who showed off the NA scene in the West Village of New York City a couple of months ago. If you listen to our third episode, she was with me during our stop at Talea's location there. Her Instagram handle is mysoberaflife. So give her a follow, and as she's a frequent traveler, we wanted to get her thoughts on finding good alcohol-free options while on the road, as well as in her home city. We also talk a little bit about Chicago, a city we'll be visiting next month. You'll hear her mention our mutual friend Jack, who you can follow at non-alc-jack, by the way, and don't worry, this is also in the show notes. She has some interesting strategies for making sure she has options when she's out or in another city. And for any locals in New York, bodegas may be the unsung heroes of the movement with an occasionally sneaky good selection. Hope you enjoy the conversation. All right. I'm here today with Chi Jennings. She's a business owner in the fashion industry from Brooklyn, New York. NA drinks enthusiasts may know her a little bit better on the gram as My Sober AF Life. I will have her handle there in the show notes for you to make sure you give her a follow. By the way, I think of we're now on this will be episode 7 of the podcast, and I believe that 3 of the first 11 guests are from Brooklyn. So obviously, there's some pretty cool things happening in non-alcoholic beverages. That there's so many interesting people to talk to in Brooklyn. But Chi, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So the last few episodes, we've gotten away from what was a tradition of cracking open an NA beer. So we're going to change that. On my end, I've got a Surreal Brewing Company, Natural Bridges Kolsch. And Chi, what do you have on your end?
I have the pretty new Montauk NA IPA that just came out. So cheers.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. I was in the mood for something light, so I believe we reviewed this one maybe last year. Okay, so to go ahead and get started, Chi, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own journey of how you discovered NA drinks? I know you're not just an NA beer person, but you're across the whole spectrum of NA beverages. So tell us how you found those and what was so interesting about them to you.
Sure. So I actually stopped drinking 2 dry Januaries ago. So tomorrow is actually my 500th day of being alcohol free.
Wow, that's awesome.
When I started on my journey, I actually did not know about any of this. Like I had, of course, heard about O'Doul's because everyone has, but I had never really understood the breadth of what was out there. And it wasn't until I got on Instagram and started getting exposed to different non-alcoholic drink brands that I realized that there were really a lot of options out there for people who maybe like the taste of beer, but they just don't want to, for whatever reason, don't want to drink alcohol anymore. So it was really through Instagram that I found out about all of these different brands. And after a while, I just started, I went into a rabbit hole of like wanting to learn about all the different new brands and finding like the new brands, like chasing the new brands, going to my local bodega and being like, is it there? Is it there? So I got a little bit obsessed with it. And it is pretty fun discovering new brands and new drinks. So I kind of treat it like an adventure now.
No, I couldn't agree more. It really, and I believe I've said this before, it reminds me, reminds a lot of us, I think, of the craft beer industry overall about 20 years ago when things first took off and it felt like every month there were new brands that were launching and then obviously new beer styles that came after that. But it really is an exciting time. And, we'll see how things play out with all these new brands coming on board. But it is fun. And the gram is a great place to find out about those brands and share stories and information. So it's definitely very cool. Mm-hmm. So I know you and I have done a little bit of NA bar crawling in New York before. I think about a
Hmm.
month and a half or so ago, and I know you are an expert in finding good NA, whether in your home city of New York or in Brooklyn in your neighborhood there, as
Hmm.
well as when you're out traveling. So, tell us a little bit about what's your strategy for when you know you're going to be in a certain area and you want to find some good NA drinks.
Sure. So, I think I would just start with some basic research to see if there's any fully non-alcoholic bars out there. And I think just being on Instagram and seeing what people are posting about, I think most people have a pretty good idea already of what's out there. If there is a sober bar, I think most people would already know about it going in. So if I were to visit, for example, Austin or go to a city on the West Coast, I already know and have heard of a few bars, sober bars that are in those cities. If I'm going to a city where I'm not so sure, I think the strategy is more to make the assumption that there's not going to be anything available, and so it becomes more of like a coping mechanism. Like, how am I going to deal with it? So, what should I do if there's no drinks at this wedding? Or, for example, I went to my cousin's wedding last weekend in Chicago, and I wasn't sure, but I just made the assumption that there weren't any non alcoholic drinks. So I went ahead and just brought my own. I went to the local non alcoholic bottle shop in Chicago, which I had already known about from Instagram, and then went there beforehand. And I was well stocked going into the event. So I think more often than not, if I'm traveling to a new place that I'm not familiar with, I'll just make the assumption that there's nothing available for me there. And I actually even carry these little, they're kind of like tea bags that have different flavors, and all you have to do is put it into cold water, and it would make like a spicy margarita mix without the alcohol. So that's something easy that you can carry in your bag without having to, put liquids into your bag, say if you were getting on an airplane. So there's
Yeah.
different strategies depending on where I'm going. I try to just like set the expectation for what I'm going to encounter there and what I'll be able to see on the menu there. And I'll just assume that there's nothing. And then how are we going to deal with that?
Well, that's a good strategy and a little more conspicuous, I guess. The trying to drag in a full can of a beverage, which I know
Right.
some people do. Go to their local brewery and may bring an NA with them. So I think doing bringing in a mix is probably a little bit safer strategy for you. So that's great. How about when you're talking to bartenders or the servers in these different places? And I know you've asked, you'll ask a lot of questions sometimes with many of them about what they have. And we have seen in certain restaurants or places, they may not put things even on the menu. From an NA perspective, they wait for people to ask for that, which hopefully that's changing. But
Right.
what kind of response do you get from bartenders when you tell them, hey, I'm looking for NA beverages or NA drinks? What would you recommend? Or what's sort of the attitude you think around it?
Yeah, I think it's pretty normalized. I think that 99% of the bartenders that I've asked think it's just a normal question. There was only one time that I got a weird response, and it was when I was at the Raider Stadium in Las Vegas. So I remember I specifically asked the bartender, "Do you have any non alcoholic beers?" And he said, "No, but we have Modelo." And I'm like, "Okay, I know you have Modelo. That's alcoholic. Do you have any non alcoholic drinks? Expand it out to drinks, not just beers." And he kept pointing me in the direction of like, "Well, we have this hard seltzer, we have this." It was almost like, I don't know if it was just some kind of miscommunication, but it was almost like he couldn't fathom the concept of going to a stadium and not having an alcoholic drink. So I thought that was kind of amusing. But apart
Interesting.
from
Yeah.
that, I think it's pretty normal. A lot of menus won't have the non-alcoholic options on the menu. Sometimes I'll even see the brand itself advertise that they have their beer, their non-alcoholic beer at certain venues, but then I'll go to the venue and it won't be on the menu. And I think the reason that it's not on the menu is because they need to change out the menu. So that could be, even if it's not costly, it's kind of like it's time consuming, so they just don't do it. Or they'll have it, but they'll say, "Oh, it's like not even refrigerated or whatever." So I think it just depends. I mean,
Right.
but if
Interesting.
you ask, you never know what you're going to get, because you could ask and they could say, "Oh, actually, we have three, and they're all of them are not on the menu."
Right. Right. Yeah, you never know until you ask. And like
Right.
you were saying, sometimes they're on there and sometimes they're not. What would you say are some of your favorite cities for NA? And so we'll come back to New York later, and I guess the Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas is probably not one of your favorite spots for NA. But what are some other cities that you've been to that you had a good experience with?
Well, I would say just maybe because I just got back from there, but I was pretty impressed with Chicago because they did have those, they had three NAs on draft. I mean, it's one thing to have NA beers in the can, but if you have NA on draft, I mean, that's a completely other level. That's
Right.
next
It's pretty
level.
serious.
Yeah,
Right.
it's pretty serious. So, going to the Taproom Pilot Brewing Project, which is basically an incubator for various beer brands, including Mash Gang, which is a non alcoholic beer brand. They had two Mash Gangs on tap, and I did try one of the two in the can before I went to the tap room and tried it on draft. And I would say that it's the same flavor profile, but it tastes completely different on draft and it tastes way better. I was pretty impressed with what offerings they had. In addition to the two Mash Gang, they also had their own NA beer on draft, which I didn't get to try. But having three on tap, I would count that as a success. So
It's
good
definitely a
on
win
Chicago for offering
for
those NA
sure.
options.
For sure. No, we have a road trip coming up to Chicago, so we're really excited to check out Pilot Project, as well as Go Brewing there in Naperville. Speaking of NA on draft, I know they have I don't know how many taps or drafts they normally have, but quite a few of
Hmm.
their different offerings are available via draft, and it's exciting to have multiple options like that. It is still a bit of a unicorn to be able to find draft. I mean, I think at this point, in at least the biggest cities in the US, and I think in parts of Canada as well, that you can generally find a few NA draft options, but maybe not a lot in a concentrated area necessarily. So it's exciting to see that. It's a hopeful development, and I know some of the smaller breweries that aren't going into a can with NA, or at least offering an NA on draft if they're making one. It's trending in the right direction, we hope.
For sure.
So besides Chicago, which you had a good experience in, what are some other cities that you've also had good luck finding some NAs or maybe some good variety?
So I'm from Hong Kong originally. I went back to Hong Kong in December to visit my parents. And there is a supermarket there which imports a lot of groceries, so food items and also beverages from other countries around the world. It's pretty international. So, yeah, I actually popped my head in there just to see what sorts of Ennies they had available. And they had a few that I hadn't tried before. They had a few from the US that I hadn't tried before, and also a few from Europe as well. So I was pretty impressed with that selection just because they had a focus on imports. So you did get a lot of variety from different countries, which I thought was interesting. But I think if you go to different places in, when I met up with Non Alc Jack in Chicago, we were saying depending on where you go around the country, there's a different availability of NA. And not everyone has access to the same brands. So I think that's pretty interesting.
No, you're right. And I'm here in Atlanta, as you know, and it's very different here. What kind of selection is available? In fact, I was just telling Jack we don't yet have Deschutes Brewery Fresh Squeezed IPA NA yet, and I know that's a big release
Hmm.
that nationally you're able to find that in most places. I think part of that issue might be tied to them not having a lot of distribution possibly in Georgia overall. So I don't necessarily think
Hmm.
it's an NA issue, but absolutely you're right. It's from one city to the next. You'll have your Sierra Nevadas, your obviously your macro producers, your athletics, but it's very different once you sort of get past that tier. It could be very different in different cities in terms of what kind of selection is available. I'm curious. You mentioned there was different variety from Europe and other places. I mean, how about how would you rate the taste, I guess, compared to options that are available more widely here in the US?
I mean, it depends on the beer, right? There was one that is the national beer of China is Tsingtao, and I actually found that here in New York. So I don't remember Tsingtao, the alcoholic version, ever tasting good or me ever liking it at all. But for some reason, I don't know, it had been a while since I'd had that beer. But for some reason, I really like the non-alc version. So I don't know if my taste buds have changed or just the ingredients in the NA version are different. I'm not sure.
Right. No, I've heard that too from others where NA version of a beer that you're familiar with or may have been familiar with sometimes could be better than the original. It could go
Yeah,
obviously the other way too, but especially if there's a beer that had a little more bitterness to it. I know
right.
in the macro world here in the US, I've heard many people say they like the Heineken 00 better
Right.
than the original Heineken. It just has a smoother finish to it. So,
Oh, that's interesting. I did try non-alcoholic PBR, and I think NA PBR tastes, in my memory, tastes almost exactly like the regular PBR. And some people would find that gross, but I found it actually strangely nostalgic and comforting at the same time. So I really enjoyed that one.
all right. No, we'll have to put that on the list. We've not had everybody loves a good lawnmower beer, so
Yeah,
we'll
for
put
sure.
PBRNA.
Yeah.
So let's come back to New York. I know there in New York, you are pretty experienced in where the good options can be found. So, what are some of your favorite spots in New York, both going out as well as maybe retail, or just what are some of your favorite options there locally?
So I would say, as far as breweries, of course, Talea is my absolute favorite of all. So I'm very fortunate. I can actually walk to three different tap rooms that have non-alcoholic beers. So the first one being Talea, which has a lot of seasonal varieties. So it seems like every summer they introduce a new summer NA. And then during dry January this year, there were actually five NAs on tap, four of which were NA beers, and then one of which was a hop water. So they did a little five beer slash hop water tasting flight, which I think didn't last very long because there was one NA beer that was an NA porter, and that one was so popular. I think it lasted 2 weeks and then they were out and they didn't make any more. So I wish
Wow.
more people had had the chance to try that because it literally, I mean, if you like chocolate and you like coffee, I think this beer would have really hit the spot for you. And I'm actually pretty upset that I didn't go there every day and drink it before it was over. So every time I see an NA on draft and I really like it, I make sure that I hit that spot like at least once a week, if not, more than that, because you never know when it's going to be gone.
Well, especially on the draft side for NA, it may not last very long, or if there's limited options, you have to make sure you get it while it's available. So,
For sure. There's Talea, and then there is Keg and Lantern, and that also has NA on draft. So that's walkable from me. And then the third one is Other Half Brewing, which has an NA IPA. So I think Other Half Brewing has a couple locations in the US. There's one upstate New York. I think there's one opening in Chicago, but I heard that they were opening one in Chicago and then I never heard anything about it afterwards. So I'm not sure if they actually opened or not, but yeah, they all have on draft, which are excellent.
so I know you were in an area that had several Boisson locations, which
Yes.
unfortunately have closed. But what do the options, I guess, look like now in terms of retail, both NA only as well as just regular beverage stores selling NA, which I know there's quite a bit of that in New York as there is in other places.
Sure. So I think that the local bodegas and grocery stores both have a pretty decent selection of NA. So at my Whole Foods, there's a really good selection of, Athletic, Best Day. Al's was just introduced there. Talea NA Spritzy Sour is there. There's quite a variety there. And then they have all the usual, Heineken Zero, whatever, if you want to buy those. And actually, I found Tsingtao there. They had that for a hot minute. It seems
Okay.
like they're constantly introducing new NA beers at Whole Foods. There's Trader Joe's that has a pretty decent selection. Usually it's Brooklyn Brewery, Athletic, Best Day, Klaus Holler. Those are the four that they always stock. And then there's the bodegas. The bodegas are good because that's where you can sometimes find single cans. And then there are still two non-alcoholic bottle shops One is Spirited Away in Manhattan. It's in Soho. That has a good selection. And then there's also Minus Moonshine in Brooklyn.
Yep.
So that's another good one. So it's pretty sad that Boisson closed. However, we do have a lot of other options to go to. And I would say the bodega usually has at least one. Sometimes it's Bravis, sometimes it's Athletic, sometimes it's Momentum, but there's usually at least one. So if you don't like what you see, just go to another bodega. They're everywhere.
Right. Well, it's encouraging to hear that they at least have one NA option there, and whether it's a national one like Athletic or a local one, or at least local to you there in Brooklyn with Momentum, which is also carried in other places. It's good to hear that those are available. And you're right. I mean, Boisson closing their stores was unfortunate, but there's still plenty of options in a lot of the bigger cities. And certainly New York has a lot of options. You guys are very fortunate in that way. And here in Atlanta, I've talked about, we have 2 NA bottle shops. And I would say too, it's really getting better at we call them package stores here, or they call them package stores here in Georgia, which are just regular liquor stores carrying non-alcoholic. I mean, our local beer store, even in the last 6 months, has set up a new aisle, basically this little mini aisle with a couple of shelves that's strictly NA, and that's new. That was not there 6 months ago. They previously had maybe half of a shelf or a small section within each of the styles with the IPAs and the wheats or the pale ales. They would put an NA option like Untitled Art or Athletic or whatever it was, and now they have enough to have kind of its own section. So it's growing on both sides. It's both the NA only, but also where people are traditionally buying adult beverages and they're seeing the value. And I've talked to a couple of beverage stores near me that have said that they sell more Athletic than just about anything else, which we know Whole Foods sells more Athletic than anything else. So it's definitely nice to see those trends.
And there's I forgot about Wegmans. There's a Wegmans in Manhattan too. Wegmans probably is, I don't know exactly where, but we have Wegmans all over the country, right? Do they have Wegmans in Atlanta?
We do not. That's another store that I wish we had. And going back, speaking of brands, we were talking about how the brand selection is different based on where you live. I have never seen Owls, which I know is pretty widely available. It's a pretty widely known NA brand, and I've never seen it in the wild. As far as I know, it's not sold or distributed anywhere in the Southeast that I've seen. So if anybody wants to hook me up with an Owls, they can feel free to do so.
We can do a trade.
That's right. That's right. So what are some of your favorites right now? Or if you don't necessarily have any favorites, what's in your refrigerator right now?
Ooh, okay. So I have a lot of stuff in my refrigerator right now. It's almost like I need to get another fridge. Luckily, I eat out a lot, so I don't really need the space for food per se. My whole fridge door has shelving for drinks and condiments and whatnot. So I would say that entire fridge door is now full of drinks. Well, we just got Mash Gang here in New York. I bought a couple cans at Minus Moonshine, so that's in my fridge right now. Good Time was in my fridge. Well, as of yesterday, it was my fridge. I drank all of it. Montauk NAIPA
as one should.
Right. Montauk NAIPA was in my fridge, but I'm drinking the last one right now. Yeah, as far as favorites, though, I mean, I love a good IPA, so I'm going to have to say Good Time.
Okay.
And I tried an NAIPA when I was in Chicago that I bought from Bendición, and Jack was kind enough to make a couple of recommendations because he's probably tried all of them. There was one called Nani, which was also an IPA, and I gotta say the flavor was pretty similar to Good Time. Not exactly the same, but so Nani is on my favorites list now. I haven't tried any of their other drinks, but I would say that. And then Ritual, of course, like Ritual Mash Gang, everyone loves that. I think the commonality between those three that I just mentioned, they all kind of have like a bitter undertone, which I like. I mean, to me, that's the whole point of drinking a beer, is that like that hoppy, like bitter taste. I mean, Montauk NAIPA is great too. I would say it's not, for me, it's not traditionally an IPA taste. If you go into it not thinking that it's an IPA, then I think you'll really enjoy it. It's like really refreshing citrus beer. The branding is on point too, I gotta say, because the can is orange and blue, and the orange speaks to the citrus flavor that's in the drink. The blue speaks to the fact that Montauk is by the sea. So it's a citrus beer that you would drink when you're at the ocean. Like say you're a surfer bro and you just got out of the ocean, you want to crack open an NA, that's the one.
Okay.
So on point with the branding there.
Okay. Well, I've seen the blue and orange can. I didn't know or didn't make the connection to what that stood for, but we definitely love a package that tells a good story.
Definitely.
So that is good to know. And I'm glad to hear you sticking local or staying loyal to local with Good Time.
For sure. Talea deserves a shout out too. Talea Spritzy Sour is good, but I have to say I really do like the NA Pom Pom Sour and also the NA Citrus Refresher, which just came out this summer. I would say those two are on another level. So those deserve a shout out as well. And they don't have those in cans, unfortunately. It's on draft. So everyone just has to come to New York City and try them.
Well, we'll just have to come back out, I guess.
Exactly.
Well, Chi, this has been really fun, and I appreciate you spending some time to share your knowledge on traveling for NA. It's exciting. We'll see where things go. We look forward to catching up with you again in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, John.
We want to again thank Chi for joining us and also for that really thorough review of some local to her NA IPAs. She's right in that there are some that just may not taste exactly like you'd expect from the style, but are still really good beers in their own right. Anyways, we've got some exciting episodes and interviews scheduled over the next month. You'll just have to wait for all the details, but we spent a fair amount of time in this series talking about the Northeast and occasionally the Southeast where we're based, and not yet really the Midwest where a lot of good stuff is obviously happening in NA beer. But that's about to change over the next few episodes, so stay tuned. And until then, cheers.